So I'm excited to be back at St. Albans, my annual trek. I was so excited when I arrived last evening. I actually put it on Facebook, posted a wonderful picture of St. Albans, and said that I was here and that I loved St. Albans since back in the days when I was diocesan spiritual director for Happening, because so many youth and adults that were active in Happening came from St. Albans, and how good it was to be back here. And I also said, I said a one-sentence version of what my theme for this sermon is, which is that Jesus is calling us to be laborers for the harvest. And I said, but they get that at St. Albans. I mean, I'm kind of like preaching to the choir. They do try to live out the whole laborers of the harvest. So they don't, I guess, in a way, y'all don't really need my sermon that much, but you're getting it anyway. So, but it was also fun to arrive this morning and see my name on the marquee. That was cool. Several people at the 8 o'clock remembered, which I'd forgotten, but remembered that last year when I was here, I had this special kind of like surgical boot on my left leg, and that's gone, which is really good. But I haven't made the progress I would really like, so I finally persuaded the doctor to give me a prescription for more PT, physical therapy, so that's what I'm doing now. So, but let's get to the real part. I've already told you the theme, but we're going to be saying it again. But God has an identity to give you. We as adults quickly learn that we can't get our identities from ourselves. The writer Alan Watts has written, trying to define yourself is like trying to bite your own teeth. Where do you get your identity? Do you need external validation? Many people get it from their work. Now, that is not quite as big in Kerrville, maybe, because there's so many retirees like me. But many people get it at their work, but y'all know at heart, we all know that we are more than our work. Some people try to get it from their children, but children are never perfect. Besides, we should let them have their own identities. So I heard a story about a little boy who came in from playing down the street, and he ran in and said, "Mommy, who am I?" And she thought he was playing a game, so she said, "Well, you're Superman." And then he got all dejected and sad and said, "The lady down the street is right." And his mom said, "What do you mean?" He said, "She said I was so dirty my own mother wouldn't even recognize me." So what is our identity that God's giving us? One piece we heard in Romans, which is that we are part of a people reconciled to God by the death of his Son. And then in the gospel today, we hear we are laborers for the harvest. See, it's the dream of Christ that every one of his followers is in mission and is a laborer for the harvest. Last Sunday, if you were in church, you know that the gospel reading was the call specific, particularly of Matthew, the tax collector, and Jesus said, "Follow me." So follow me, Jesus asks of us. But then today he's answering, what does that mean, Jesus, to follow you? What do I do to follow you? Now we will see that fleshed out in the coming Sundays as well. It's not just today. But it's clear that the gospel doesn't stop just at words. It's also translated into deeds. And even our collect for today has that theme, because we ask for God's help to help us proclaim God's grace and assistance to help us proclaim the gospel, that's the words, and minister justice with compassion. That's the deeds, that's the being the laborer in the harvest. These deeds of healing and reconciliation, feeding the hungry, comforting the sorrowing, they're not to be done just by Jesus and not just by the 12, but by you and by me. It's been said that the Jewish priest would say that true religion is doing the temple sacrifices perfectly, whereas the Pharisees would say good religion is rigorously following the jot and tittle of the law, whereas Jesus said, "Follow me and demonstrate love." And then Paul and those after him said, "Demonstrate Christ-like love." So God's love is not just a vague idea or sentimentality. It's Christ-like, meaning it goes all the way to the cross. Goes to the cross and dies for us without any sort of payment. "In my hand no price I bring, simply to thy cross I cling," as it says in Rock of Ages. That's not the Bible, that's a hymn. Love is not an inference of the universe. In fact, what we observe around us often seems to contradict the idea of the love of God. It's a confession of faith instead. It's a matter of trust, arising from the acceptance of the death of Jesus as the basis for our own reconciliation. So then we're called to demonstrate that through actions and events, not just feelings, not just sentimentality. Oh, isn't it special that Jesus died for me? Well, yes, it is. So be a laborer in the harvest, because that's what Jesus asks you to do. We're to be agents of divine power and love to a pain-filled world. Now, y'all, that's a high calling. Let me say it again. We're called to be agents of divine power and love to a pain-filled world. That's your mission, should you accept it. It's a crucial mission. It's Jesus' mission. This isn't just for the world's benefit, however. There is a side benefit, and that is for our own happiness, yes. Because living out our own true identity, our God-given identity, ultimately leads to happiness. Dr. Carl Menninger was perhaps one of the leading psychologists of the entire 20th century, and he started the Menninger Foundation in Topeka, Kansas, which became known as the Mayo Clinic of the Mind. There's also Menninger clinics today in Houston and Phoenix. Those are the two I know. There may even be others. But very leading psychologist. And he was asked toward the end of his life, what would you advise a person to do if that person felt a nervous breakdown coming on? Now, we don't use that phrase anymore much, nervous breakdown. Nobody seems to have nervous breakdowns, but we lose it. So maybe it should be, what would you advise a person to do if that person felt like they were about to lose it? So most people thought his answer was going to be consult a psychologist. Duh, that's what I am. Or at least talk it out. Talk it out, that's what you should do. No, that wasn't his answer. His answer was, if you feel like you're about to lose it, lock up your house, go across the railroad tracks, find someone in need, and do something, anything, to help that person. We make a mistake if we see the disciples as especially smart and capable people. They seem special now because they're in stained glass and they have ST in front of their names, but they were actually very ordinary. There was no wealth, there was no academic background, there was no social position. They are a lot like us. In fact, here's kind of an interesting little story about the Beatitudes. Then Jesus took his disciples up to the mountain and gathered them around him, saying, Blessed are the meek, blessed are they that mourn, blessed are the merciful, blessed are they who thirst for justice, blessed are you when persecuted, blessed are you when you suffer. Be glad and rejoice, for your reward is great in heaven. Then Simon Peter said, do we have to write this all down? And James said, are we going to have a test on this? And Andrew said, are we supposed to remember this and memorize it? And Bartholomew said, do we have to turn this in? And John said, the other disciples don't have to learn this. And Matthew said, when do we get out of here? And Judas said, what does this have to do with real life? Then one of the Pharisees present asked to see Jesus' lesson plans and inquired of Jesus his terminal objectives in the cognitive domain, and Jesus wept. So that hits me because that is me. I mean, I can hear myself saying that. Do I have to memorize this, Jesus? Am I going to be attested on this? I mean, I can hear myself saying that. So the disciples are just like us. I mean, we don't know that they really said that. Yes, that's sort of a made-up thing. But that helps us realize who they were. They were regular guys, and they were not these little holy people running around in stained glass at that time. Jesus is not looking for extraordinary followers. He's looking for ordinary followers who can do ordinary things, but extraordinarily well. Look at Matthew, the tax collector, and Simon, the zealot. Matthew was a tax collector. That was considered about the worst thing a Jewish person could do because you are collaborating with the Roman oppressors. And you are probably also using graft to make your income because the Romans didn't pay you enough, really. So they would add and say, well, actually, you really owe this, you really owe this, you really owe this, and they'd keep it. That's why they're called the tax collectors and the sinners. Simon the Zealot, meanwhile, was the violent anti-Roman. We're going to kill these, don't want to use the wrong word, we're going to kill these people, Romans, and get them out of here. And so the point being that The plain fact is, if Simon the Zealot had met Matthew the tax collector anywhere else other than the company of Jesus, he would have stuck a dagger in him. People who hate each other can learn to love each other when they both love Jesus. People who don't feel equipped to be laborers in the harvest can become so in the presence of Jesus. If you're sitting here, well, I'm not really equipped to be a laborer in the harvest, get into the presence of Jesus. You'll be able to do what you need to do because Jesus will equip you. So, to summarize all this, we're given big responsibilities. Jesus doesn't want us to have some sort of ordinary, boring life. He gives us a high calling, each one of us. What if I gave you this list of things to do that he gave? Cure the sick, raise the dead, cleanse the lepers, cast out demons, and do it without payment. We'd go, I'm overwhelmed. I can't do all that. That's ridiculous. Well, just go where people hurt, is what Jesus would say. Just go where people hurt. You don't have to go very far. You can stay entirely in Harlingen. Where people experience emotional or physical or spiritual pain, we are sent to proclaim the good news of God's love and God's power to make new. Help them see and feel God's love and God's power to make new. The list Jesus gives us is mainly just to make us think, what else is God calling me to do? What this list shows us is that we can't be his disciples, his laborers in the harvest, on our own, especially on our own power. We can't empower ourselves, or I should say, I can't empower myself. The only one who can provide the power necessary is Jesus, the risen Lord. Only the one who perfectly embodied the kingdom can breathe the life of his Spirit into a new generation of laborers for the harvest, you and me. Trust that that power of Christ can work through you with loving and transforming power. And then accept Jesus' call on you to follow him and be a laborer in the harvest. Amen.